Hi everyone. So, the Roman Catholic Church has a new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, which gives me the perfect excuse to talk about Apostolic succession. That is the Catholic doctrine that today's Pope inherits his authority in an unbroken line stretching all the way back to Peter, the Apostle of Jesus. It certainly sounds impressive on the surface. But how strong is this chain in reality? And would you really be surprised if it's held together more by myth, political maneuvering, and outright corruption, rather than by divine right? And yes, Leo XIV joins a colourful cast of previous Pope Leos, including one who was anti-pope, one who was handpicked by a woman, one who tortured heretics, and one who lasted just 27 days. But more on them and some other popes later on in the video. First, let's take a closer look at the supposed rock on which this church was built. The doctrine of apostolic succession leans heavily on one passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verses 18 and 19, where Jesus says, "And I tell you, you are Peter, Petros, and on this rock, Petra, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." But even this so-called foundational moment raises immediate red flags. The Gospel of Matthew was written decades after Jesus' death, likely around 80 to 90 CE, and it was written in Greek, not in Aramaic, the language Jesus and the apostles spoke. More plausibly, it was a later author who attributed the phrase to him. There is no contemporary evidence confirming that Jesus appointed Peter as head of a hierarchical church. Paul, writing earlier than the Gospels, repeatedly clashes with Peter and never mentions the supreme authority vested in him. And as for Peter himself, we know surprisingly little. The details of his alleged time in Rome, his supposed role as bishop, and even his martyrdom are based on later traditions, not contemporary sources. The idea that he founded the Roman Church is not confirmed by any early Christian texts. In fact, the earliest writings don't even mention Peter as the first bishop of Rome. But even if Peter did have special authority, how would that authority be passed down? There's no clear biblical mechanism for succession. Early Christian communities were decentralized, often disagreeing fiercely over theology and leadership. The idea of a single, centralized pope with universal authority only began to take shape in the 4th and 5th centuries. If apostolic succession were divinely ordained, why did it take centuries to articulate? And why didn't early Christians agree on how it worked? The early list of Roman bishops, retroactively framed as popes, was compiled long after the fact. It's more theological legend than historical record. Names like Linus, Cletus, and Anacletus appear only in later sources. We have no reliable evidence about their actions, or even their existence as bishops in the modern sense. In fact, some sources treat Cletus and Anacletus as the same person, and some as two different popes. Meanwhile, other Christian centers like Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem were just as influential in the early church. Rome's later dominance had far more to do with political power than spiritual primacy. There wasn't one single apostolic throne, there were many. Rome simply won the power struggle. But even if we accept the chain of succession, we must ask ourselves, what kind of men actually inherited Peter's supposed authority? Take Leo I, the first pope to claim universal jurisdiction over the entire church. He styled himself Pontifex Maximus, a title once held by Roman emperors. His authority wasn't just based on Peter, it was backed by imperial ideology. And while he's remembered for meeting Attila the Hun, he also orchestrated a brutal crackdown on the Manichaeans, a major religious rival, in 447, declaring that no punishment was too severe for them. Tolerating them, he said, would mean the end of human and divine law. So much for religious tolerance. And Leo I was just the start. The later Pope Leos offer a rogues gallery. Leo II confirmed the condemnation of Pope Honorius I as a heretic for endorsing monothelitism, that is, the belief that Christ had only one will, as opposed to the view that won out, diothelitism, that in addition to the two natures in the one person of Jesus, there are also two wills in the one person of Jesus. This event shows a pope, that is, Honorius I, being formally excommunicated by an ecumenical council, and this condemnation was upheld by later popes. Catholic apologists later tried to minimize this by saying Honorius didn't teach heresy, he just failed to stop it. But the council's language is pretty unambiguous. Honorius was condemned, quote, as having followed them, that is the monothelitists, in all things, close quote. Leo V briefly held the papacy during the violent Saeculum Obscurum, the dark age of the papacy, also known as the rule of the harlots, or the pornocracy. He was imprisoned by a man named Christopher, who declared himself pope in his place. Leo V died shortly afterward, either murdered or executed by Pope Sergius III, who may also have had Pope Christopher, later dubbed Anti-Pope Christopher, executed. Leo VI was hand-picked by the Roman senatrix Marozia, a powerful noblewoman who likely had his predecessor, Pope John X, killed during the Saeculum Obscurum, that age during which aristocratic families treated the papacy as their plaything. Leo VII ascended to the papacy after Alberic of Spoleto, the de facto ruler of Rome, bought the office for him. Leo VIII is a canonical oddity. He is considered an anti-pope during his first reign, then a legitimate pope during his second reign. In his first term, he claimed to be pope simultaneously with John XII and Benedict V. Leo IX presided over the Great Schism of 1054, the formal break between the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. His rigid enforcement of Roman primacy helped shatter Christian unity permanently. Leo X was pope during the early Reformation. He dismissed Martin Luther's 95 Theses as a monk's drunken ramblings, missing the most important religious upheaval in centuries. He famously said, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." Leo XI was pope for just 27 days. The Liz Truss of popes. A divine appointment that barely lasted a calendar month. And Leo XII banned Jews from owning property, reinstated the Roman ghetto, and launched aggressive crackdowns on more liberally minded Carbonari and Freemasons. He relied on secret informants and police repression to root out dissent, ruling the Papal States more like a reactionary autocrat than a spiritual shepherd. Far from embracing the compassion of the gospel, he governed with a rigidity that mirrored the coercive tactics of later authoritarian regimes. And it's not just the Leos. Especially between the 9th and 11th centuries, the papacy became the private estate of noble families like the Dukes of Spoleto and the Counts of Tusculum, who routinely installed relatives, bought elections, and deposed rivals or worse. There's Pope Boniface VI. He seized the papacy during political chaos after the death of Pope Formosus, possibly through bribery. He died, presumably poisoned, within 2 weeks, and was succeeded by Stephen VI. Pope Stephen VI, who was backed by the Spoleto family, put his dead predecessor Formosus on trial in the infamous Cadaver Synod. The corpse was propped up, condemned, and thrown in the Tiber. For what he did to Pope Formosus, Stephen was later imprisoned and strangled to death. Pope John XII was a relative of the Counts of Tusculum, the aforementioned powerful Roman family that dominated papal politics at the time, and he was the son of Alberic II, Duke of Spoleto. He was accused of rape, gambling, and invoking pagan gods during Mass. He reportedly turned the Lateran Palace into a brothel. Although these accusations are to be taken with a grain of salt, like many popes of the same period, he was engaged in behavior more befitting of a feudal warlord than a spiritual leader. Pope John XIX again belonged to the powerful Counts of Tusculum and became pope despite being a layman. He was quickly ordained only after buying the office. He succeeded his own brother Benedict VIII. And lastly, we have Pope Benedict IX, who served 3 times between 1032 and 1048. He was made pope as a teenager due to family influence as a member of the powerful Tusculum family. Benedict was the son of the Count of Tusculum, Alberic III. He was closely related to several popes. He was a nephew of Benedict VIII and John XIX, grandnephew of John XII, great-grandnephew of John XI, and first cousin twice removed of Benedict VII. His father got him the papal chair by bribing the Romans. Benedict IX's papacy was nothing short of scandalous. Not only did he sell the papacy to Pope Gregory VI, his godfather, but he later tried to reclaim it, resulting in military conflict with his successor, Pope Sylvester III. A number of prominent clergymen appealed to Henry VIII, King of the Romans, to restore order. Henry and his forces crossed the Brenner Pass into Italy, where he summoned the Council of Sutri to decide the matter. Benedict IX, Sylvester III, and Gregory VI were all deposed as pope. Henry then had Clement II elected as pope in December 1046. Benedict's reign was so scandalous that the Church retroactively tried to erase parts of it. This wasn't a matter of just a few bad apples. It was centuries of nepotism, violence, and moral corruption. The papacy became a hereditary state, auctioned off, stolen, or usurped, ruled by gangsters in cassocks. Far from being the vicars of Christ, many popes were warlords, degenerates, or political puppets. If apostolic succession were truly sacred, how could it be bought, sold, stolen, or inherited like a family heirloom? The historical record doesn't just challenge the idea of an unbroken chain of spiritual leadership, it exposes it as a profoundly human institution. The actual line of popes includes bribers, murderers, and frauds. And if Catholics want to argue that the apostolic line was defined by those who emerged victorious, and that their victory itself proves they were ordained by God, then they are simply making a circular claim, that the winners are legitimate because they won, and they won because they were legitimate. If legitimacy is granted solely to those who prevail, then apostolic succession becomes a matter of raw power, power that legitimizes and sanctifies itself after the violent fact, through the so-called sacrament of ordination, i.e., the villains were injected with the magic, so it's all good now, right? That's like saying a crew of ruthless pirates who seized a ship and sailed it under the king's flag and replaced every part of it over the years can now claim to be the rightful navy, not because they served the crown or followed its laws, but because they kept the flag flying, copied the uniforms, and punished anyone who dared to disagree. Let's call it not the ship of Theseus, but the ship of Peter, a ship we have no evidence Peter ever boarded, whose original construction date is unknown, if the original even ever existed at all, But generations of captains in the centuries after, including a long line of ruthless, cruel pirates, insist it has always been Peter's ship, magically preserved by some champagne bottle ritual that guarantees continuity no matter what. That is sophistry, crafted only to preserve the illusion of unbroken continuity. What do you think? Are popes truly the successors of Peter, or the heirs of an idea too fragile to survive even superficial scrutiny? Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.